I-24 News. Judge Brett Kavanaugh has the votes to be confirmed to the United States Supreme Court after 3 previously undecided senators say they will vote yes on his nomination.
And you think he'll get confirmed tomorrow?
We'll get our best. I would think so.
The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has left Washington for his 4th visit to North Korea, where he will help set up the next summit between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. Plus, an in-depth look at the U.S. battle in Afghanistan, America's longest war. Does the U.S. have an exit strategy?
From the I-24 News studio in Times Square in New York, this is Take 30 with Shayna Estulin.
Hello and welcome everyone to Take 30. I'm Tal Heinrich in for Shayna Estulin. We begin tonight with another dramatic day on Capitol Hill. Earlier this morning, the Senate narrowly voted to advance the Supreme Court nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. It was decided by 3 key swing senators, making the final tally 51-49. One of those senators, Susan Collins, defended her decision on the Senate floor later in the day.
This is not a criminal trial, and I do not believe that the claims such as these need to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Nevertheless, fairness would dictate that the claims at least should meet a threshold of more likely than not as our standard. The facts presented do not mean that President...
For more, let's bring in senior national correspondent Michael Schur and senior White House correspondent Dan Raviv. Michael, we'll start with you. It seems like Republicans have the votes and that Judge Kavanaugh will be confirmed tomorrow. Based on what you've seen in the procedural vote today and what you're hearing on Capitol Hill, should we expect any surprise?
You know, I don't think so, Tal. I think those who are holding out some scintilla of hope that there will be a reversal by one senator, particularly Jeff Flake, who kind of flirted with the notion, saying that his mind could change by tomorrow if he learned something new. But as of now, he's a yes. Those are people hanging on to the last straws of hope that they can possibly put together. I spoke to Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut earlier today, asked him about that possibility. He wasn't by any means saying that he thinks that this will happen, but he did speak to that for us.
It's a steep climb to try to convince someone else who voted yes on the procedural motion to vote no tomorrow, but it has happened before. I was here last year during the debate on the Affordable Care Act, and as I walked to that vote, I was pretty convinced that we were going to lose, that the Affordable Care Act was going to be repealed, and it wasn't, because a senator who had voted yes on the procedural motion voted no on final passes. That was John McCain. I reserve the right to believe that that's possible again.
And Senator Murphy went on to say that, you know, this is going to be a reckoning for the Senate. They're going to have to figure out how to come together after a vote like this. It was pretty divisive, Tal.
Dan, this is shaping up to be a huge achievement for the Trump administration and the Republican Party. Put this achievement in perspective for us, and how is the White House reacting today?
Well, it's so important to conservatives in this country, and conservatives voted for Donald Trump, even though he's not a conservative on everything, including spending and, well, some say his personal behavior, but they were counting on him to change the Supreme Court. And he is changing it. Last year, Neil Gorsuch, a conservative judge, became a Supreme Court justice. This year, of course, Donald Trump has chosen Brett Kavanaugh. It's been controversial and divisive, but it does seem like the Senate will be confirming Kavanaugh to the court. By the way, the final vote, it appears, will be 50-48, as Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska, gave a long speech explaining why she would vote no, but it said in the end it'll be recorded as just present because she wanted to be nice and balance out a yes. Senator Steve Daines of Montana will be away at his daughter's wedding. So look for 50-48. How's the White House reacting? Actually quite restrained. There was a tweet from Sarah Sanders, the spokeswoman, thanking Senator Susan Collins of Maine. We heard her, right, announcing that she will vote yes. Thanks for doing the right thing, is what the White House said. Donald Trump's been quiet, but Saturday night, he'll be speaking at a rally in Kansas. I bet you he'll be celebrating on stage, assuming the Senate does confirm his guy Kavanaugh. Tal.
Probably. Michael, many Democrats and women around this country see this expected confirmation as sending the wrong message to sexual abuse survivors. They're angry, but they're also energized. How do you think this will affect the midterms about 5 weeks from now?
Again, it's prognostication. My prognostication on this was wrong. I wasn't bullish on the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh from the beginning, so I was wrong about that. But I do think that there will be a lot of women voters out there, and male voters too, who did not like the way that this went down. And those, you know, in the races that are very close, Tal, especially in smaller states, those few votes could make quite a difference in a state like Montana, perhaps in Nevada, obviously big states, but they have small populations. That's where you can see some of the impact from energized voters, energized women. And I have to say, we've seen them here. Anecdotally, we've seen many, many protesters around the Capitol. I know Dan saw them here yesterday. I saw them here today. They've been in the hallways chanting. They've been on the streets speaking from podiums. There is an angry electorate out there right now, and they're all certainly intent on voting, Tal.
So much pressure on lawmakers this week. Dan Raviv, Michael Shore, thank you both. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is on his way to Asia for a visit that includes a very important stop in North Korea. The secretary will meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Pompeo is expected to arrange another summit between Kim and President Trump. For more, let's bring in senior diplomatic correspondent Nina Larson. Nina, what can we expect from Pompeo's trip, especially after his last planned trip to North Korea has been canceled following that hostile letter from a North Korean official? So what's different? What's realistic now?
Well, it's fair to say, Tal, after that last trip where Secretary Pompeo did not meet Chairman Kim as promised, he was left struggling through endless North Korean banquets and really came away empty-handed. And the North Koreans insulted him after he left, saying he presented gangster demands. So expectations are quite low for this visit. But having said that, the message we've had from the State Department all week is that he simply would not be going unless they feel that the North Koreans have something to deliver. And Pompeo himself has been talking to the one reporter that he's taking on this trip, which also includes Japan, South Korea and China over this weekend. And the message seems to be from him that he's really expecting to come out of this a solid time, date, place for the next round of the Trump-Kim summit. It seems that both sides have come to the conclusion that it's only the leaders of both countries that are actually the big decision makers in all of this. And the aim of both sides is to get them around the table yet again.
They have to have some face time. You mentioned China. Nina, it seems that North Korea is trying to get Russia and China on their side and get their support for lifting economic sanctions. But what's the status of the sanctions now?
Well, China has always been a long-standing ally of North Korea. 90% of North Korean imports come from China. They effectively keep that country operating. And there has been some suspicion at the United Nations that these all-encompassing sanctions are being circumvented by China and Russia. There are accusations from Pompeo, from Nikki Haley, from other members of the Security Council that there's some kind of gap in these sanctions, that certain goods are reaching North Korea by sea. So China is a key player in all of this. They don't want to see those sanctions any stronger than they are already, let's put it that way, to be diplomatic. But this certainly will be a big topic of discussion for Secretary Pompeo when he's in Beijing on Monday.
And Nina, just briefly, what is the timeline for cutting to the chase and talk denuclearization?
Well, it really depends which Trump official you speak to, Tal. Pompeo has given quite a realistic timeline of denuclearization within a few years to 2021. And they have a sophisticated program, so it would take that long. But President Trump says the opposite. He says it's all open-ended.
Nina Larson, thank you. All right, still to come here on Take 30. The Trump administration wants to pay Mexico to deport illegal immigrants before they reach the U.S. border. So how exactly will this work? A top U.S. contractor is pushing the Trump administration to privatize the war in Afghanistan as the United States marks 17 years of conflict. That's the longest war America has ever had. Welcome back. The Trump administration is moving ahead with a controversial plan to pay Mexico $20 million to deport migrants. Under the program, Mexico would be responsible for detaining migrants in their country before they reach the United States. The goal is to have Mexico go through the lengthy legal process of deporting migrants instead of the U.S. The plan, however, is facing serious opposition among Democrat lawmakers and the Mexican government. So how exactly will this work? To discuss, we have here on set with us immigration attorney Raul Manchanda. Raul, why is Mexico saying no to this deal? What's so bad for it for Mexico?
Well, I don't think Mexico's saying no, but it's such a nominal small amount when you think about it in terms of fiscal policy for immigration. You know, in America, this would cost billions of dollars. This is more of a nod to the Mexican government saying, look, you know, help us out, you know, with this situation, because they, you know, the State Department recognizes, and so does ICE and Homeland Security, that, you know, a lot of the ideology, a lot of the problems of illegal immigration originate in Mexico through their south border, you know, from South American countries. So this is sort of a wink and a nod, also to salvage the NAFTA deal, you know, the North American Free Trade Agreement. You know, so right now the Mexican-U.S. relationship is at a historic low, and so this is sort of a nod. $20 million is really not a lot of money, which is very surprising in the dollar amount. So.
Do you think that this, though, could work, the idea of getting Mexico somewhat more involved?
Well, it certainly could, and when I was looking at the dollar amount, I said to myself, well, this is probably not going to go for infrastructure. This might be going to, we don't want to say certain officials to grease the wheel, so to speak, but it's really a small amount. In terms of infrastructure, you're talking billions of dollars. So, you know, the Mexican government actually deports more people than the U.S. government does, which is ironic. People don't even realize that. So per capita, they do a lot more to deflect against illegal immigration than the U.S. government does. So I think this is more of a wink and a nod from State Department to sort of mend the fences and mend the ties with the Mexican government that has sort of been attenuated over the last couple of years since Trump took office.
Oh, but now there's a new trade agreement, and everyone seems to be happy. Trump even spoke on the phone with the new president. But I want to ask you this idea of giving Mexico money now, 20 million, as you say, in return for their cooperation. What does it tell you about Trump's pivotal campaign promise of building the wall? Where is the wall?
Well, ironically enough, this is a political issue, and you had mentioned something about the Democrats opposing it already. The ACLU will probably oppose this as well. You know, unless this is unprecedented in history that we actually give money to another country to enforce immigration. Usually we give money to enforce things such as, you know, anti-terrorism activity, anti-drug activity. This is historically why we give money to other countries. We've never actually given money to a country to enforce the immigration laws or help us with immigration because it's sort of innocuous. But, you know, if they can tie this to a national security threat, then they might have a fighting chance of, you know, deflecting against the inevitable Democrat or ACLU onslaught that's inevitably going to happen. Why are we giving money to help another country enforce its border laws?
Well,
but if they can show,
it shows you that immigration is just a very high topic on the Trump administration agenda.
Yes, absolutely. And again, this is unprecedented. I think that's going to be a legal fight that's going to come up with the Democrats. Are going to use this as another political football. But again, if the Trump administration can show that this is tied to national security or safety or health or, you know, even counterterrorism, you know, because a lot of these, you know, there's allegations that the terrorists are using some of these routes, these narco-trafficking routes and tunnels underneath the border to bring in certain individuals that may or may not be, you know, maybe on the ICE radar or the Homeland Security radar. So if they can show that this is a national security issue and that this is for the safety and benefit of the United States, then potentially this would be upheld. But it's never happened before, not in my recent memory.
You know, even people who disagree with President Trump on immigration and his policies, they also, some of them at least, tend to agree that the immigration system in this country is broken. So what would be your first step to try to fix it? What do you think are a couple of measures that the U.S. has to do?
It's a great question. And yes, the immigration system is broken. No matter who you talk to, it is broken. But the problem is that the legislation isn't moving forward because, you know, the Republicans in office right now are sticking to certain concrete, you know, developments that they want to see achieved first before they even think about it. So the border wall is one. You know, we want the border wall. We're not going to talk about the legislation, which this much to the chagrin of the Democrats, the senators. Chuck Schumer, for example, is irritated. Nancy Pelosi, they're all irritated because they can't even get this in front of the Congress, the Senate. And that's because, you know, the Trump administration is holding fast and saying we need that wall. We need certain concrete things, border enforcement, that kind of thing, and infrastructure. So unless there's this wall built, you know, they're really probably not going to get this moving, which is, you know, a big disappointment for immigration proponents at this point.
Or unless there's partisanship.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
All right, Rahul Manchanda, thank you so much. Turning now to the war in Afghanistan. Sunday marks 17 years since America entered the conflict, making it the longest war in U.S. history. But instead of winding down, the opposite is happening. This week, the head of the U.S. Central Command told reporters that the number of Afghan casualties was increasing. Meantime, one idea being floated around Washington to end the violence is a push to privatize the war. Afghanistan's president has rejected this idea. All of this comes ahead of parliamentary elections, which are scheduled for later this month in Afghanistan. And to discuss it further, we want to bring in Kelly Vlahos, executive editor of the American Conservative. Thank you for being on the show, Kelly. You know, a simple philosophy says when you go to war, you go there to win the war. And you should have a very solid definition of what it means to win. Otherwise, don't go to war. It's been 17 years. What is the U.S. still doing in Afghanistan?
Well, I think that's a great question. But unfortunately, I remember, you know, reporting on the war in Afghanistan 17 years ago, and there still wasn't a definition of victory to be had for this war. And I think you hit it right on the head there. There has been no clear, no clear definition of what winning looks like. Our strategy has gone from bringing a government in a box to specific areas like Kandahar and hoping to grow government, U.S. aid government in Afghanistan. That was a failure. There was a strategy to arm and train the Afghan forces. That's been a failure. There's been numerous strategies about trying to help Kabul and building government there, ending corruption, you know, sort of like strengthening the civil society there. That's been a failure. And I feel a malaise in the United States about this war. The military has taken on the responsibility of, you know, continuing efforts there, but the political support for it here in the United States is very thin, and the societal support for it is gone. I mean, people, a recent poll had indicated only 50% or less than 50% of Americans believe that we are winning there. They believe it's a failure. I'm actually surprised it's not more. And if they're not worried about, if people aren't connected to soldiers or others or contractors who are working and fighting in Afghanistan now, most people seem unaware that it's even going on. So it's really a problem going forward because there's no effort to end the war in Afghanistan and our efforts there, but there's seemingly no political interest in sort of examining and taking stock of what we're still doing there.
Can you describe what is the situation in the country like? To what extent is the Afghan government really in control? Or in other words, what happens if the U.S. leaves Afghanistan?
Well, the problem is for some time has been that most of the security in Afghanistan is emanating from Kabul, and so you have this small area of actual security because we have sort of helped the government sort of tamp down the violence in Kabul, even though there's still violence there. But the government is functioning in Kabul. Otherwise, we are seeing the same Afghanistan, if not worse, than 17 years ago. The Taliban is still strong. It's getting stronger. They've been attacking all of the strongholds that the United States was responsible for and had helped Afghan forces hold over the years. They are now contesting and holding about 61% of the country. That is a rotten record when you think of all of the time and money and blood and treasure that's been expended there by all sides, not just the Americans, but the Afghans too. We've spent upwards, the United States, of $2 trillion in Afghanistan. Wow. And billions in training and arming the security forces there, and it's come to nothing. If you still find that 61% of the country is being held by the Taliban, and then you not only have the Taliban, but you have ISIS in the country now, which was not there before. It wasn't even in existence when the U.S. came into Afghanistan. We had testimony by our generals saying that upwards of 20 terrorist groups are there now.
But supporters of U.S. presence in Afghanistan, they say that the goal is to negotiate with the Taliban and bring about a political solution to the country that will also guarantee no future international terrorist attacks outside of Afghanistan. But can this even be achieved, if at all, by anything else but endless expensive involvement?
Right. I understand that talking with the Taliban is very important right now, and I think there is great interest on behalf of the Americans at this point to take negotiations to another level. But we're forgetting one other side here, and that is Pakistan. And for years we've known that Pakistanis have been arming, harboring, protecting and nurturing the Taliban on the Afghan side. They deny it, but everybody in Washington knows this is true. But no government, whether it be Bush or Obama or now Trump, have been able to pressure them adequately to stop their support of the Taliban. So until the Pakistanis are brought into the process, the peace process, you can have all the talks between the U.S. and Kabul and the Afghans that you want, but it's not going to ultimately go anywhere until the Pakistanis are brought in and they back off. And unfortunately, we could be there for another 17 years having the same conversation.
Well, there's this idea now pushed forward by private military contractor Erik Prince, founder of Blackwater, to privatize the war in Afghanistan, meaning replacing U.S. military advisors on the ground with private contractors. The Afghan government rejects this idea. But, Kelly, what do you think about it? Is it a solution, or is there a different solution?
Well, I only have one thing to say, and that's Iraq. I mean, Blackwater was in Iraq for years. We saw massacres, we saw corruption, we saw all sorts of bad behavior. And if you want to transfer that to Afghanistan, be my guest. But Erik Prince is out there saying that he and his 3,600 mercenaries can turn around this country in 6 months. And this is the kind of rhetoric and flattery that he's prancing around Afghanistan, promising. But I'll tell you, if to bring mercenaries who have no accountability, no rules of war, nothing tying them to any responsibility back to the United States is a nightmare in the making. And if you take that step, you're opening up a Pandora's box, not for just Afghanistan, but other conflicts. If you start bringing in private contractors already exist and private armies and mercenaries, but for him to suggest that he could swap out our troops for his mercenaries and that will settle the score is just it would be grave folly for the United States and for Afghanistan.
Kelly Vlahos, thank you for this very interesting conversation. And that does it for Take 30. But don't go anywhere, because Stateside with David Schuster is next, and he will have the latest from Capitol Hill and the all but certain confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, plus a look back at the Me Too movement 1 year later. So all of that and much more. You should stick around with I-24 News. We'll be right back after a very, very short break. I'm Tal Heinrich. Thank you for watching Take 30.